If you didn't watch the best way of drafting a female blazer jacket, here is the video on the top right corner of your screen. Also, I've put a link in the description box down below. Go click and watch that best way of drafting a female blazer jacket. Hi everyone, welcome to TOPSTITCH Tailoring Studio. In case this is your first time to discover this channel, in this channel I always upload pattern drafting tutorials based on any design or fashion that you feel like we should draft after you have left or dropped your comment in the comment section down below. And if you are a returning viewer, please, I welcome you back. Please, thank you so much for supporting TOPSTITCH Tailoring Studio. So in today's video, I'm going to show you the other way of drafting a female blazer jacket. Ladies and gentlemen, let us get started. I draw one vertical straight line, which will be the center back guideline, one horizontal line on top of my pattern paper, which will be my neck and shoulder guideline. Now, I continue inserting other horizontal lines that are needed for this female blazer jacket. First is to determine the blazer jacket full length. From starting point A, I measure downwards. Cord full length 28 inches plus 0.54 length is. After, I square across a straight line, and this line is the coat hemline. Next horizontal line is the hem allowance line. From the hemline, I mark downwards 1.5 inches for the hem allowance. Also, I square across a straight line. Next is to determine chest line. From starting point A, I measure downwards chest 39.75 inches divided by 4, giving me 9.9 inches. So I mark 9.9 inches here. After, I square across a straight line. Next is to determine belly stroke tummy height. I measure this distance from the chest line to the hemline. I divide it by 2 to get the midpoint. Then, from this midpoint, I mark upwards 2.5 inches. Then, I square across a straight line. Since I'm drafting a female blazer jacket, there is need to determine the hip position. From neck stroke shoulder guideline, I measure downwards 25 inches, but this height varies from 21 to 27 depending on how tall or short your client is. Also, I square across a straight hip line. Next is to determine across back height. From chest line, I measure upwards chest 39.75 inches. I divide by 24, giving me 1.65. So I mark 1.65 inches here. Still, I square across a straight line. As you can see, the 7 horizontal lines that are needed for this blazer project are ready. Next is to shape my blazer center back line. I come at the chest line. I mark inwards 0.5 inches. Across back, I mark inwards 0.125 inches. Belly line 1 inch. Hemline 1 inch. After, I draw my back shaping line like this. I'm done with the back shaping. Next is to work on the back neck. From starting point A, I measure inwards chest 39.75 inches divided by 12, giving me 3.3. So I mark 3.3 inches here. Then, from this 3.3 inch point, I mark upwards 1 inch. Still, from starting point A, I measure inwards shoulder 16 divided by 2, giving me 8, plus 0.5 for seam allowance. Then from this 8.5 inch point, I mark downwards 0.5 inches. I connect this point to this point to create shoulder slant line. Next is to widen my back neck. At this point, I mark inwards 0.25 inches. Also at starting point, I mark downwards 0.125 inches. Then I connect these points together to create back neckline curve. What I have here, which is 8.5 inches, I square it down. I minus 1 inch, giving me 7.5 inches. So I mark 7.5 inches here. And then I connect this point to this shoulder drop point to create back arm line rise. Also at this point, I mark outwards 0.5 inches for seam allowance. I come to the belly line. I measure inwards belly 35 divided by 6, giving me 5.8 inches. But I will just customize this 5.8 to 6 inches. So I mark 6 inches here plus 0.5 inches for seam allowance. What I have here, which is 6.5 inch, I square it down to the hemline plus 0.75 inches. After, I connect these points together to create backside seam line. I'm not going to insert vents to this pattern, but if you want your vent to be at the center back, you mark it this side. Also, if you want the vent to be on the sides, you mark it on this side. Okay, let us continue to outline seam allowances for the back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are done with the back. Next is to use the back for developing the front and the side panel. I first trim the back like this. I lay it on a new pattern paper. I go ahead and trace out these horizontal lines. As you can see, all the lines are traced. Since we are working on the front part, I will have to insert a cross front height line. So, from chest line, I mark upwards chest 39.75 inches divided by 16, giving me 2.48. So I mark 2.48 inches here. After, I square across a straight line. I now unpin the back pattern and put it aside. Then I continue working on the front panel. First is to draw this straight line, which will be my blazer coat center front guide. After, I insert front neck. From this point, I mark inwards front neck with this chest measurement 39.75 inches divided by 8. Giving me 4.96, but I will customize this 4.96 to 5 inches. So I mark 5 inches here. Then from the neck stroke shoulder line, I mark downwards chest 39.75 inches divided by 24, giving me 1.6 inches for shoulder drop. Then I come back to this neck with this point. I mark slightly upwards 0.25 inches. After, I bring back my back pattern paper. Then at this 0.25 inch point, I trace and copy the back shoulder drop like this. Then I connect it to create front shoulder drop. Then from this neckline point, I mark downwards chest 39.75 divided by 24, giving me 1.6 inches for front neck depth. Also, at this point, I mark downwards chest 39.75 divided by 12, giving me 3.3 inches. So I mark 3.3 inches here. At this point, I mark slightly inwards 0.25 inches for neck shaping. After, I connect these points in this way to create front neck shape. Next is to insert chest measurements to the chest line. From this center front line, I mark inwards chest 39.75 divided by 4, giving me 9.9. I mark 9.9 inches here. I square these 9.9 inches to the belly line, 9.9 inches to the hemline. After, I draw a straight line connecting this 9.9 inch point at the belly to the 9.9 inch point at the hemline. I come back to this 9.9 inch point. I mark inwards chest 39.75 divided by 48, giving me 0.8 inches. I mark 0.8 inches here. Also, from this 0.8 inch across front rise point, I mark outwards chest 39.75 divided by 24, giving me 1.6. I connect this point back to the belly point to create a complete front side seam line. I come back to across front rise point. I square up a straight line. Also, I connect this shoulder drop point to this point. Then, using my free hand, I create a curve slightly like this. Also here, I connect it to this point to create front armhole curve. We are done with armhole area. Next is to work on the blazer chest pocket position. From this point, I mark inwards 2 inches. Then from this 2-inch point, I mark upwards 0.75 inches. From 0.75 inch point, I slant my pocket by 4 inches. Also at this 4-inch point, I mark upwards 1 inch pocket height. Here also I mark upwards 1 inch pocket height. I connect these points together to create chest pocket shape. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying and learning, please hit that subscribe button, share and like this video. If you do that, you have paid me a reward of encouragement. Okay, we continue. Next is to work on the blazer darts. I measure this distance of the chest pocket divided by 2 to get the midpoint. So here is the midpoint. I square this midpoint to the hip line. Then I draw a straight line to create a dart line. From the chest line, I mark downwards 2 inches for that point. At the belly line, I mark that intake of 0.5 inches on each side. Now, I connect these points together to create chest dart legs. Next is to work on the first button and the hip pocket placement. I come at this hemline. I mark 0.5 inches down. Then from this 0.5 inch point, I mark upwards. Cut full length 28 plus 0.5 length is, divide by 3, giving me 9.5 inches. So I mark 9.5 inches here. After, I square across a straight line. From this line, I mark 1.5 inches down. After, I connect my hip dart legs in this way. I'm done with the dart area. Next is to insert hip pocket. At this point, I mark 0.5 inches. At this 0.5 inch point, I square down a straight line. I mark down 2.5 inches pocket flap. I create pocket flap design in this way. I go ahead and mark out seam allowance line of 0.5 inches. As of now, we are done with the front part. Next is to trim off my back pattern. And it is this one I will use for calculating the side panel as well. First, I mark out ease allowance of 0.25 inches at the chest line, 2.5 inches at the belly line, but you can add less or more of ease allowance depending on how loose or fit tight you want your blazer to be. But as for me in this tutorial, 2.5 inches is enough for this particular client. After marking ease allowance point, I now get my back pattern. I measure this distance excluding seam allowances. Here I have 7 inches. So I come at this line. So I come at this 2.5 inch ease allowance point. I measure inwards. Hip 43 divided by 2 giving me 21.5 inches. Here I jump this 0.5 seam allowance. I continue measuring. So here is my 21.5 inches plus 1 inch for side panel seam allowance. After I measure this distance, I square it up to the chest line. Then I join these points together with a straight line. Now I go ahead to shape the belly stroke tummy. From this point I mark inwards. Hip 43 minus belly 35 giving me 8 inches. I divide it by 4 giving me 2 inches. So I mark 2 inches here. Also, I come to this point, I mark outwards 0.5 inches. I get my back pattern. I measure this distance excluding seam allowance. Here I have 7 inches. So from this 2.5 inch ease allowance point, I minus 7 inches for the back. I measure inwards, chest 39.75 inches divided by 2, giving me 19.87. I jump this allowance, then I measure continuous. Here is my 19.87 plus 1 inch for seam allowance. Now, I connect this point to the belly point all the way to hemline. Make sure you blend in this line like this. Also, this point I connect it to the front panel side. Okay, I measure this distance. I divide it by 2 to get midpoint 1. Also, this midpoint, I measure this distance to get midpoint 2. I come here, I mark inwards 0.75 inches. At midpoint 2, I mark 0.5 inches down. At midpoint 1, I mark 0.75 inches down. Using my curved ruler, I now create side panel armhole line like this. Okay, we are done with the side panel. I come to the front panel. At this 0.5 inch point, I create my new bottom hemline. Also, I shift the hemline of 1.5 inches. Depending on the style and design you want, you can leave it in this way, or you can go ahead and shape the bottom. Okay, let us shape the bottom. If you remember this point, which is our first button position, I mark upwards to the next button 4 inches. Then, from this second button, I mark upwards 0.5 inches for lapel bottom breakpoint. At this lapel breakpoint, I mark outwards 0.75 inches button allowance. I come at the neckline, I mark outwards 0.75 inches. I connect this 0.75 inch point to this point to create lapel break line. I come to this new hemline point, I mark diagonally 1.5 inches. Now, using this ruler, I create a bottom shape like this. Next is to mark out lapel widths. From this lapel break line, I mark 2.5 inches lapel widths. Using my free hand, I create lapel shape in this way. Ladies and gentlemen, our blazer coat has already taken shape. Next is to shape the bottom. From this original center front line, I mark inwards 4.5 inches. Then I create this shape. For the collar drafting, check out on this video I've put on the top right corner of your screen. Also, I've put its link in the description box down below. Go click and know how to draft both notched collar and peak collar. Okay, we now go ahead to trim off our pattern by separating the front from the side panel. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this drafting series, and this is the outcome. Hope you make yours today. My next video will be cut and sew, and it is the most requested episode. Just keep tuned by subscribing so that you don't miss out the upcoming amazing practical classes. As of now, I say thank you so much for watching and supporting Top Stitch Tailoring Studio. See you in my next cut and sew video. Bye bye. God bless you all. Shalom. I sign out.